BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin.
Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? Hope everyone had a good weekend. Just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we begin. And the first is that this week there will be the first ever members-only podcast available through BuyMeACoffee.com, and it's going to be released here on YouTube, but it will be only available to the members who have been using the premium membership. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out here on Zodiac Monday. But I've recently launched the channel membership, which gives you access to bonus content and bonus features, and one of them is the members only podcast, and there's a whole list of things that will be available through the membership, and you can read more about that at BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88. And of course, you can always hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. I do a segment every Wednesday called Ripper Wednesday, where I talk about Jack the Ripper. One of the recommended videos that someone had encouraged me to watch was from the psychological profiler Pat Brown. And she talked a lot about Jack the Ripper in the episode because it was of a particular topic that she was discussing, but it was even more fascinating to just hear her observations about serial killers in general. So I would like to begin this episode with a challenge question, and it's a statement that she made on her show, but I want to know, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Serial killers are acting the same way in their normal lives as they do when they commit the crimes. I'll try and rephrase that. Serial killers act the same way in their normal lives as they do when they commit the crimes. And this is really might be shocking to some people. You'd be like, well, no, of course not. In their normal lives, they aren't committing murder unless they absolutely have to avoid capture. She clarified on her show what she meant by that, and that is that if somebody's a messy person at home and they're a serial killer, when they're committing the murders, they're also going to be a messy person. If somebody is a neat and orderly person at home, then when they're committing the crimes, they're also going to be a neat and orderly person. And when you look at a Zodiac killer suspect like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, she brought up those types of criminals directly. I mean, not only is Kaczynski a Zodiac suspect, he is was a convicted murderer. He passed away earlier this year. And what she says is people like him who are designing bombs and building bombs are very meticulous, and they tend to have very meticulous and neat and orderly lives when they're experiencing normalcy. Do you agree with that statement, though? Overall, I have to give some type of disagreement because I almost feel that it's forcing people into a false dichotomy. It's forcing the direction into a false dichotomy for the following reason. I am a very neat person in my work life. I mean, it just even frustrates me that my other co-workers are not neat and orderly, and I even go through great efforts to make my workstations to always keep them in an organized manner. This goes way back to when I was 23, when I had my first job right out of college, I had 6 different types of documents that I had to work with, 6 different papers, and I just had 6 stacks of them on the desk in front of me, and they were all just arranged 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And my other coworkers would just have all their papers in a mess, and I thought, well, that's slowing down the process. But in my home life, I am so messy. I mean, I don't want you guys to see my bedroom or anything. I mean, there's stuff everywhere, and I'm not the only person who's like that. My sister is even worse than I am because she is extremely careful with everything she does in her work life, and you couldn't even walk in the rooms in her home because there's just junk everywhere. So people aren't always neat all the time. They're not always messy all the time. And that is just one specific example. Her comment wasn't only about being neat and orderly versus being sloppy and messy. It was more to show that people take certain behaviors and traits with them throughout the entirety of their lives. And my challenge is I have to disagree because I think that people can perform certain things in one way and certain things in another way. And I know that some people in the comment section are already disagreeing with the statement that serial killers act the same way in their normal lives as they do when they commit the crimes, because you guys have written this stuff out in the comment section here on Black Box Online Radio, saying that they think the Zodiac killer was a persona. It was something that was created as a type of character, and saying that when the Zodiac killer was committing his crimes, he was in full persona mode. When he was making phone calls, he was in his full persona mode. When he was writing letters and ciphers, he was in his full persona mode. And I mean, I can completely comprehend that narrative. In an unsolved case, anything's possible, but I can follow that line of thinking to an extent that the Zodiac is pretending to be somebody else. Now, there was one other point that was discussed by Pat Brown on her episode about Jack the Ripper, but I mean, again, this is something that I would like to use as a challenge question about the Zodiac killer, and it was talking about the different types of serial killers, and this is her terminology. I don't like how these things sound, but she said there's a bop and drop killer and a ruse killer. And a ruse killer is a little bit easier to explain at first because a good example would be Ted Bundy, and the ruse would be making up a story to lure a victim to a place and then attacking them. Ted Bundy very famously wore a cast on his arm and said, "Oh, my arm's broken, but I need to do something with my boat. Can you come help me?" He made up a story to get the victim to the vulnerable place. This can even be done with people who are targeting just trying to get someone into their car. I mean, this can be done in that way. And a lot of serial killers target prostitutes, and they make up a story about how they're just going to have a normal sexual encounter. Gary Ridgway even had something where he would tell the victims that a certain sex position would allow him to finish more quickly. And they were just thinking, oh, well, then I can leave earlier. But he was just trying to get them in a vulnerable place. I mean, like literally, so he could grab them from behind and I mean, it's like making up a story to attack the victims, so that he has easier access to the victims. Now, the real thing that I don't like is the term bop and drop killer, but her example of a bop and drop killer would have been Jack the Ripper. Now, the Ripper is still unsolved. No one knows who Jack the Ripper truly was, or even which crimes committed by the Ripper were actually done by the same person. But what she said is she didn't believe that the Ripper was making up any type of story to talk the victims into a false sense of security. She thought that Jack the Ripper would just attack women, maybe not even saying anything during the attacks, just walking up to them and attacking them, or at the very least, not making any fictitious story to lure them to him. What about the Zodiac killer? What about the Zodiac? I think the only fair way to answer that question is by saying the Zodiac was both a ruse killer and a bop and drop killer. Now, there are different sets of crimes that were committed by the Zodiac. The Zodiac was a serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is anybody's guess. But there are a set of homicides that have been directly attributed to the Zodiac in those 2 years. And really, I said 68 and 69, but it's only about a 10-month time frame when the Zodiac Killer was operating. Let's look at some of these examples. Now, at Lake Herman Road, the first confirmed crime where we saw the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, absolutely, I think that that was a bop and drop crime. I don't necessarily believe that there was any type of false story or trickery that was used to lure the victims anywhere. I mean, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, July 4th of 1969, I think the Zodiac just walked up and shot the victims. No ruse going on. You could also call that the bop and drop crime. Now, at Lake Berryessa on September 27th of 1969, absolutely, that was a ruse murder. It led to the murder of Cecilia Shepard. Brian Hartnell would survive the attack. But absolutely, that is a ruse killing, because the Zodiac Killer is walking up to them, and he's saying, all I want is your money. I'm trying to get to Mexico. I'm an escaped convict. I killed a guard at a prison in Montana. It was called Deer Lodge Prison. Maybe. Something to that effect. So, the Zodiac is weaving together a story purely to put the victims into a false sense of security. And we know that the Zodiac didn't go to Mexico because he kept writing letters from the Bay Area. And roughly 2 weeks later, on October 11th of 1969, he murdered Paul Stine in the Bay Area. So there is really just no chance that that story had any factual merit, unless you're entertaining some type of wacky copycat theory or multiple killers theory. But it really just goes to show that sometimes the Zodiac is doing these bop and drop kills. Again, I don't like the term, but that's what she called it. And sometimes he's making up the ruse. And the Zodiac said other things at Lake Berryessa. It's possible that he talked to the victims for up to 15 minutes, to Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, and he's just telling them that he's not going to hurt them. He just wants the money. He's just going to tie them up. But again, that was purely manipulating the victims into doing what he wanted, even though he didn't have to. He didn't have to say anything about, I'm an escaped convict and I'm trying to get to Mexico. It was almost as if the language was used purely to control the victims, the false sense of security that I've been talking about. Whereas I like to bring up frequently, I think that the Zodiac was inspired by the 1966 South Chicago massacre, where Richard Speck murdered 8 student nurses in one night, and he said, all I want is your money, I'm just trying to get to New Orleans. And that, I think the Zodiac was an avid reader of true crime magazines, and possibly books too, and of course, the movies. Now, the final victim of the Zodiac Killer in 1969 possibly was the murder of Paul Stine, which took place on October 11th of that year. And that was a bop and drop kill. It's possible the Zodiac made up some story in the taxi. We don't know what was said to Paul Stine in the taxi where he was murdered. Paul Stine was a taxi driver shot once in the side of the head. And this is where we get the Zodiac Killer composite sketches from. The Zodiac was witnessed by Lindsay Robbins and Rebecca Robbins, the Robbins kids as they are referred to, and they provided the details for the composite sketch. And also the Zodiac was witnessed by Donald Falk and Eric Selms walking away from the crime scene. So this goes to show that the Zodiac used both of these elements in his true crime planning, and his criminal planning, I should say, rather than true crime. He was a bop and drop killer and a ruse killer. Now, somebody presented me with a challenge question. Because we've gone through the Zodiac's confirmed crimes, someone gave me this challenge question, and that is that you can see I'm getting my words jumbled a bit because it's kind of a humorous thing to say. I'll just say flat out. Which Zodiac killer crime do you think was the most chicken shit? Somebody asked me that as a challenge question. Which Zodiac killer crime do you think was the most chicken shit? Sometimes, it's hard to say something like that with a straight face. But I know the answer to this one. 100%. No, nothing to the contrary. The Blue Rock Springs shooting. By chicken shit, he meant cowardly or not confrontational or just some type of very, very low or minimal interaction with the victims. The Blue Rock Springs shooting on July 4th of 1969, which saw the death of Darlene Ferrin. And the reason is because the Zodiac Killer just walked up to the car and he had a flashlight, and the light went into Mike Mageau's eyes, and he was blinded, and the Zodiac just started shooting, and then he perhaps walked away for a little bit and then came back and shot again, but overall, that has like such a minimal amount of confrontation with the victims. That would definitely be the most chicken shit crime. With the Lake Herman Road murders, it appears that the victims were ordered out of the car, and the Zodiac maintained control of the situation in some way. At Lake Berryessa, the Zodiac had an extended conversation with the victims, and he still maintained control of the situation. And with the Stein murder, the Zodiac got very up close and personal with Paul Stein. As far as the Blue Rock Springs shooting goes, that was the dumbest. It required the least amount of intelligence. It was the most cowardly, and it was also just a very odd way of committing the crime, because the Zodiac didn't have to spray the victims with bullets. He knew fully well that he could have just shot them in the back of the head or the side of the head in some type of execution-style manner, because he had done that to David Faraday at Lake Herman Road. But if you'd like to challenge me on any of those points, you can put your ideas in the comments section down below. I would love to read your messages. And moving on to the next segment here on Black Box Online Radio, I would like to talk about a recent interview that I did with Jeremy Berthiaume, who is the author of the book So I See You Don't Paint Houses, and talks about Richard Gaikowski as a Zodiac killer suspect. Firstly, I have several different interviews with Jeremy on this channel, and you can find them. They have his name in the title, particularly the Zodiac Killer News Report Richard Gaikowski edition, where he laid out his theory about the Zodiac Killer, and of course you can read his book, So I See You Don't Paint Houses, which is available for purchase online. But I wanted to look at a very particular observation that he had made about the Z13 cipher, because the Zodiac Killer wasn't only a serial killer, he also wrote letters and ciphers and like cryptograms, and he made up stories, and he made phone calls, and he wrote a message on the car door at Lake Berryessa. So the Zodiac is a braggadocio, if you will. Well, that's one aspect of his personality. I've talked about other aspects of the personality that the Zodiac has. See, I don't mean to get sidetracked. I really don't mean to get sidetracked, but the reason why I disagree with that whole thing about the serial killer's the same in his normal life as he is when he's committing the crimes, the Zodiac wasn't even the same during the entirety of the Zodiac persona. At one point, the Zodiac's all like, they will never catch me because I've been more cleverer than them. And then at other times, the Zodiac's like, if I get ignored, I'm going to get lonely, and then I'm going to do my thing. And then it's just like this conflicting type of personality traits. Not to mention that the Zodiac misspelled words when he definitely could spell words correctly. All types of inconsistencies in the Zodiac's activities, personality, the creation of the Zodiac killer image, all of that is inconsistent. So that was mostly why I disagreed with that statement that serial killers are the same in their normal lives as they are when they commit the crimes. But I'd love to know what you think. Anyway, the Zodiac killer mailed in a cipher that is 13 characters long. It has an A, an E, and an N, the Zodiac symbol, a circled 8, a K, a circled 8, an M, a circled 8, a symbol of some sort. Maybe it's an Aries sign, maybe it's an anchor, and the letters NAM. It's referred to as the My Name Is cipher, but there's a set of text that surrounds this letter, that surrounds the cipher. The letter text surrounds the cipher. And I'm going to read the entirety of it for you, because Jeremy Berthiaume has a very interesting theory about that, and I would also like to share my observations about the cipher. And it reads, "This is the Zodiac speaking. By the way, have you cracked the last cipher I sent you? My name is blank, the 13 symbols. I am mildly serious as to know how much money you have on my head now. I hope you do not think that I was the one who wiped out that blue meanie with a bomb at the police station." Actually, it says cop station. My brain was reading that a little bit too fast. "Even though I talked about killing school children with one, it just wouldn't do to move in on someone else's territory. But there's more glory in killing a cop than killing a kid, because a cop can shoot back. I have killed 10 people to date. It would have been a lot more except that my bus bomb was a dud. I was swamped out by the rain we had a while back." Okay, that's just the front page of that. And, but this is the text that we were discussing. And it says, "I hope you do not think that I was the one who wiped out that blue meanie with a bomb at the cop station." This is referring to the Park Street explosion which saw the death of Brian McDonald. And there are multiple suspects in this murder, And there are countless resources online. I mean, I hope that his case is going to be solved one day and we'll find out who murdered Brian McDonald. But I was also impressed that a lot of people were making tributes and showing support. And there was even one that was just saying, it's a cold case, it's 35 years old at the time. At the time, it's an old YouTube video about it from 14 or 15 years ago. But they were saying, it's been 35 years since the murder of Brian McDonald, but we need to find the killer. We need to bring justice, and justice needs to be served. And I absolutely applaud them for that. And as far as this goes, there was a bomb that was left at the Park Street station, and one suspect, and this is the Zodiac killer, of course. Another suspect is someone from the Weather Underground, a domestic terrorist organization and movement. And the two most famous people associated with the Weather Underground are Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn. And I wanted to get the phrasing right, so I asked Jeremy that question. Do you think that Bernadine Dorn is a reasonable suspect in the murder of Brian McDonald? And he said no to that. I was like, do you think she's a possible strong person of interest? Phrasing it like that, and then he said yes to that. So he's trying to be very careful with his wording for legal reasons, and I totally can follow him there. But as far as who's mentioned in this text, I hope you do not think that I was the one who wiped out that blue meanie with a bomb at the cop station, even though I talked about killing school children with one. Okay, so the Zodiac has said very clearly, even in the same letter, that he has a plan for a bomb, but Jeremy's suspect is Richard Gaikowski, who was a member of the counterculture movement, and that could tie in very easily with the Weather Underground, this 1960s domestic terrorist movement. And he's talking about how Richard Gaikowski could have possibly known who planted the bomb. Perhaps he possibly knew that it was the Weather Underground, even if it's not Bill Ayers or Bernadine Dorn specifically. No, that's not what he said. I'm just giving some, conditions or possibilities that could be put out. But that the Zodiac knows that the Weather Underground was responsible for the murder of Brian McDonald. That's why he said it's someone else's territory. It's not his. What do you think about that? Because my immediate first instinct when I read this for the first time, and yes, I had heard of the Weather Underground and Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn, but my interpretation of this, my first instinct when I read this cipher years ago, and the little text of the letter was that he's talking about the police station. And that's what he's saying. I hope you do not think that I was the one who wiped out that blue meanie with a bomb at the cop station, even though I talked about killing school children with one. It just wouldn't do to move in on someone else's territory. And I was discussing this in the most recent interview that I did with Jeremy, but I mean, we don't have any type of rehearsals or any type of question checklist to go through. I didn't know what he was going to bring up, so sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get the wording all in order. And I just wanted to state very clearly that was my first response to this. He's talking about the police station, saying that the Zodiac hates cops. He's even making fun of them, calling a dead cop a blue meanie, and he used the term blue meanie in multiple letters. But what he's trying to say is that he doesn't want to attack them in their home, in their own place of employment. And the evidence that I have to support this is the Zodiac didn't attack people indoors. The Zodiac murdered people outside. For example, Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, all of these are outdoor locations like Blue Rock Springs Park, and Lake Berryessa also has a surrounding park. Now, the Zodiac killer's final crime, the murder of Paul Stein, took place in a taxi cab, but I still do not count that as somebody's home. And that is what I think he's trying to say, that it's just something that is not within his psychopathology. But that's what I think that, I guess I'm kind of 50-50 now. I was dead set on that in the past. I mean, that's just what I thought he was referring to, saying that someone else's territory means that he hates cops, but he doesn't want to attack them in the police station. He doesn't mind murdering cops because there's more glory in killing a cop than killing a kid, because a cop can shoot back, but he doesn't want to attack them in their home, and I think that either he has some type of personal reason, or maybe it doesn't fuel his excitement in the same way. And I mean, the Zodiac is also somewhat of a deranged person. He was a serial killer. What do you think the interpretation of that should be? And I said I'm 50-50 now because the more I learn about the Zodiac Killer mystery, the less I realize that I know. And there could be all sorts of possibilities and meanings. There could be other suspects in the murder of Brian McDonald other than Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn and the Zodiac Killer. And it could be just a totally random person. Just to share some things about Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn. I mean, they both went on to become college professors, and Bill Ayers did an interview with Larry Elder, the radio host, and he was talking about something, and of course he's not going to admit to murder live on the air, but one point that he wanted to say was that the Weather Underground never killed anyone. Yes, they detonated bombs, but the bombs never actually hurt anybody. And then Larry Elder brought up a story about how someone just by chance walked away and they were minutes from being killed in an explosion. And he asked Bill Ayers, does he feel guilty about that? And he said no, because nobody was hurt. And you see that there are different blends of personalities, and they're deranged and demented in their own right, if you ask me. But as far as this thing about the Weather Underground never murdering anyone, I think that Bill Ayers revealed some type of some elements of his dark side. But I've heard several interview clips with Bill Ayers in the past, and I can see why people follow him, because he does have somewhat of an engaging and charismatic personality, even though I absolutely disagree with any type of domestic terrorist-related action that he committed as part of the Weather Underground. Now, Bernadine Dorn, on the other hand, I don't see anything likable about her. I just think she comes across as cold and conniving, and I don't see anything that is likable. But that's just, again, my take on the subject. And if you have any comments about the murder of Brian McDonald or about the Zodiac Killers, my name is Letter. Please feel free to state your ideas in the comments section down below. And right now I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. Once again, anybody who makes a shoutout will get, anybody who makes a donation or contribution will get a shoutout on Zodiac Monday. And the first one comes to us from Batman66. And Batman66, thank you for your regular and consistent support. You are awesome. And the second one comes to us from Quentin Broom, and it just says ND. And I was like, North Dakota? ND, North Dakota? What's going on in North Dakota? Are you talking about the Son of Sam case and the Carr family? The episode that I did recently called Son of Sam, The Death of John Carr? Then I was like, ND, oh wait, Nid Dahan. That's my name. My goodness. Quentin Broom, thank you so much for your support on BuyMeACoffee.com. And our next one comes to us from Floyd Black 53, who says, hi Ned, I've been super busy, but I just want to show my support. I'm almost finished with my second book. I'm doing the first one over, and then I want to give you both, probably by the end of the year. I would love to read them, and perhaps they will make their way into the Black Box Online Radio discussions. As far as talking about some recent things with the channel, I did an episode for the Anything Goes Friday segment last week about the death of David Carradine. David Carradine, the actor, who died in 2009, and the official narrative is he accidentally killed himself during autoerotic asphyxiation, but I actually was able to fuel the conspiracy theory a little bit, and that's something that I mostly don't do on this channel. Mostly I'm talking about skeptical reasons about why conspiracy theories are false, and on the surface there is a very high chance that David Carradine was either murdered or there was some type of foul play involved with his death, meaning that he was seeing some type of person who assisted him in the erotic asphyxiation, and very simply that the authorities in Thailand where he was found did not want to investigate. And that is something that I think needs to be discussed more and more. These stories of people who are experiencing, that the authorities don't want to investigate their murders because they just want to close the case and say that it's a suicide. It happens more frequently than people think, and that would be an example of conspiracy theories that turn out to be true. And with David Carradine, there is even the possibility that there was a footprint on a bed that didn't belong to him, that was in his hotel room, and he's found dead from quote-unquote erotic asphyxiation. Not necessarily murder, but just meaning that there was a participant who accidentally killed him. Again, that could be manslaughter or culpable homicide, or that could be extreme circumstances when someone wouldn't even be charged at all, but that person simply wanted to flee the scene and they didn't want to deal with any type of legal backlash. Maybe they were terrified for their life or something like that. But if you'd like to hear more about that, that's in the episode The Death of David Carradine, A Dark Conspiracy, here on Black Box Online Radio, inviting you guys to like and subscribe. Moving on to the next segment here on Black Box Online Radio, I've talked to you guys about the Zodiac Killer every Monday for quite some time right now, and I fully confess that there is one crime that I've neglected, and one crime that I should have been talking about more frequently, and it's really a double homicide, the Snoozy and Furlong murders from August 3rd of 1969. Now, the Zodiac Killer committed the Blue Rock Springs shooting on July 4th of 1969, August 3rd, July 4th, July 4th of 1969, the Zodiac Killer committed the Lake Berryessa stabbing on September 27th of 1969. But what was the Zodiac Killer doing for the month of August? Because we have the August 4th letter, of course, but also, did the Zodiac Killer commit a murder in August of 1969? And it possibly could be the stabbing of Deborah Furlong and Kathy Snoozy. And I would like to go over to ZodiacCyphers.com and read the text of an article that has been posted there, and there's also a San Francisco Chronicle article that is posted on ZodiacCyphers.com that I will read as well. Big thank you to Richard Grinnell, who runs that website, for sharing these resources. Deborah Furlong and Kathy Snoozy were found murdered on August 3rd of 1969 in the Bay Area of San Jose. They were brutally stabbed innumerable times, and Deborah Furlong was 14 years old at the time. Kathy Snoozy was 15 years old. Their murders were claimed by the Zodiac Killer on November 8th of 1969 when he mailed the dripping pen card. 21 months later, Carl Francis Werner would be arrested for their murders. For extra information about Kathy Snoozy and Deborah Furlong, please visit the Monticello card. And there, the article that was posted from the San Francisco Chronicle says, 2 teenage girls brutally slain in San Jose. It actually just says an SJ, but the first line is San Jose. The bodies of 2 teenage girls, each stabbed at least 50 times, were found in a wooded area Sunday. Police said that they were mystified by the apparently senseless killings. The bodies of Deborah Furlong, age 14, and Kathy Snoozy, age 15, were discovered in an Oak Grove stop, a hill in a fashionable San Jose area. Police said that the girls were fully clothed and apparently sexually molested. The girls were found during a search that was mounted after they failed to return from a picnic. It was not known who made that discovery, but reports from police indicate that it was either an equestrian or motorcyclist. Police began a house-to-house canvass of the neighborhood in hopes of finding someone who had seen the 2 girls during the 2 to 4 hours between the time they left their homes to the time that they were believed to have been killed. Now, here's something that we do have to evaluate, and that is that the girls were out on a picnic, and they were teenagers, younger than the Zodiac Killer's other victims. And also, when it says they were stabbed at least 50 times, that's actually somewhat of a low number. I mean, one victim was stabbed over 100 times, and another victim was stabbed over 200 times. And the suspect that would go on to be apprehended and later on convicted for it was Carl Francis Werner. And even to this day, there's still some debate that he did it, because this is another discussion that I was having about how, okay, there's been a conviction. And again, I'm just talking to somebody about the Zodiac Killer. My personal Facebook is in the description box. Also, the easiest way to get in touch with me is by writing BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. And yes, I did talk to someone who was saying that Carl Werner could possibly be innocent, or that he was wrongfully convicted or coerced into confessing. But I'll just read the basic info about him here. Carl Francis Werner was an American serial killer who was active in Santa Clara County in Northern California. He was convicted of the murder of 3 teenage girls during his period of activity from 1969 to 1971. And the other girl that was murdered was Kathy Billick, who was age 18 years old. But first, I'll read the basic info on the Snoozy and Furlong murders one more time. On August 3rd of 1969, the bodies of 14-year-old Deborah Furlong and 15-year-old Kathy Snoozy were found on a hillside in a southern Alameda Valley. Both girls had left their San Jose homes earlier that day to go to a picnic at that location, and that means that they were just picnicking by themselves. I don't believe that there was any type of party or outdoor function going on. Their fully clothed bodies were found the same evening on a wooded knoll overlooking the homes. Neither girl had been sexually assaulted, and investigators initially theorized that they had been killed at a separate location due to the lack of blood at the crime scene. This is in direct contradiction to the San Francisco Chronicle article, which I read off, that said they had been sexually assaulted. But I believe that this is true. I believe that this is the correct version, that they were not molested or sexually assaulted. It even states that their bodies were fully clothed. And I mean, I don't believe that a sexual assault took place. According to Santa Clara County Medical Examiner Dr. John E. Hauser, the girls had died in a frenzied flurry of knife wounds, with more than 200 wounds found upon Kathy Snoosey and more than 100 wounds found upon Deborah Furlong. All the wounds were found on each girl, and they had been inflicted above the waist, and neither girl's body bore evidence of resistance to her assailant. Dr. Hauser would further remark that despite his having been a coroner for many years, he had never encountered a case with so many knife wounds that had been inflicted. And even I have to admit that this is an enormous amount. Yeah, I'm sure there are going to be murders and homicides that have more knife wounds and stab wounds, but this is a very, very vicious stabbing. And there's even a quotation from someone saying that the Nazi doctors in the camps who tortured victims didn't even do things that were as heinous as this, because I just think that there are two immediate responses. One is that this sounds like a very vicious and sadistic and violent killer, and the other hand is, I am reminded of the story of George Chun, who was one of the victims of Elliot Rodger. Elliot Rodger was a mass shooter who was known as the Isla Vista shooter, sometimes called the Santa Barbara shooter, and he did commit a mass shooting. He also tried to kill people by running them over with his car before he took his own life from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. But the first three murders that were committed by Elliot Rodger were the murders of his roommates, and one of them was George Chun, who was stabbed over 90 times. I believe it's 94, maybe 96, but stabbed over 90 times. And what is so saddening but also important to remember is that people who are in this particular age demographic, which Carl Francis Warner would have been of a similar age to Elliot Rodger. And you have to think that there are things like hormone levels, adrenaline, physical fitness, and it's also a type of raid killing that could be committed by a frustrated late teenage, early 20-something person. And I do think that that's consistent in one way, but on the other hand, I look at a story like Jack the Ripper and the murder of Mary Kelly, and you just have to wonder, was the person who committed that crime just high on drugs, particularly cocaine? Was the person who committed the Snoosey and Furlong murders high on drugs as well? But the next crime that Carl Warner would be convicted for was the murder of Kathy Billick. On Sunday, April 11th, 1971, Kathy Billick visited Villa Montalvo in Saratoga, with the intent to read and engage in bird watching in the seclusion of a remote wooded portion of the park near a small stream. Her body was found the next day by her father, Charles, while the Santa Clara County Sheriff's deputies searched nearby. She was stabbed 17 times in her back and 32 times in her chest and stomach, although her killer had taken care to avoid stabbing her breast area. Now, this is a little bit different, but there has been a conviction in the case, and Carl Warner has been convicted. Billick was murdered in the Villa Montalvo Park in Saratoga. A park maintenance man who had seen him there, who knew him to be a little odd, and was able to give the police the name of the Oak Grove High School graduate of the San Jose City College, Carl F. Warner. Warner was a student and classmate of the first two victims. According to a girl who dated him, he was accomplished in mathematics and was not a weird, skulking guy that we picture as a serial killer. Hey, guess what, people? You can't picture anyone as a serial killer. They can always surprise you. Think about all the different true crime stories that you've heard, all the different aspects of serial killers, whether it's somebody like Ted Bundy, who's actually has somewhat of a polished presence, or somebody like Richard Ramirez, who was a criminal thug who got out of control, or somebody like John Wayne Gacy, who likes to dress up as a clown. You're going to find all types of behaviors with serial killers, and it's just, you can't really just picture somebody as a serial killer. How many times have you heard, oh, well, he was the nicest guy in the world? And then how many times have you heard, well, he didn't say much, but he did have a mean streak, and sometimes he just had a short fuse and you couldn't expect it? All different types of personalities can go on to become serial killers. That's how they get away with it. Warner had previously been a suspect in an unsolved knife assault of another woman. A search warrant was obtained and the knife used in the Billick murder was located on the premises of the Warner residence. The local authorities had already drawn a connection between the Snoozy and Furlong slangs and the Billick murder, calling them a carbon copy killing. Well, I don't know, those sound definitely more vicious, and there are 2 victims versus 1 victim, hardly a carbon copy killing. In September, Carl Warner confessed to the murders of Snoozy, Furlong, and Billick and received a life sentence. Initially, the San Francisco police inspector Dave Toschi suspected the Zodiac killer may have perpetrated the Snoozy and Furlong murders at the time of his arrest. It was considered that Carl Warner was the infamous Zodiac. However, it was subsequently determined that Warner had been in Marlborough, Massachusetts at the time of some of these Zodiac slayings. Warner, it actually says on his page that he is still incarcerated, but I believe that Carl Warner passed away. Oh, no, excuse me, that was just an article about someone named Carl F. Warner. Same spelling, identical spelling, but someone with that name passed away in 2018, but that might be unrelated. So, as far as alternative theories go, it appears that some people doubt that he actually had the murder weapon, that the police lied about that piece of evidence. They doubt that he had the mindset and the, just the entire personality to commit the crimes. You heard that there. Even though I challenge that, but I'm citing the counter arguments that he had that his behavior didn't match up with the profile of the killer, and also that even though he was involved with an unsolved knife attack where he didn't viciously stab the victim 200 times, that this might be even somewhat excessive. Okay, so he's one suspect who's been convicted. What about the Zodiac killer? When I first learned about the Snoozy and Furlong murders, I was like, what are people talking about? How on earth could there be any Zodiac connection? I don't want to know anything about the Zodiac taking credit for it or alluding to it in any communication. I don't want to hear about that. No, absolutely not. 110% no. The Zodiac didn't stab victims 200 times. The Zodiac didn't stab victims 100 times. The Zodiac tied people up and stabbed the victims like maybe 6 times or 10 times. And obviously, you guys know that I don't think the Zodiac committed the murder of Sherry Jo Bates in 1966. But as I said, over time, I've just learned and accepted that the Zodiac was an inconsistent serial killer, and that I'm always open to possibilities. And if they did convict the wrong person, that would be a definite miscarriage of justice, and someone would have been railroaded when they didn't commit the crime. Now, that doesn't mean anything about the murder of Kathy Billick, although rest in peace to all of the victims. Carl Warner still could be guilty of that, and I don't think those crimes are identical, but I just don't see a whole lot of Zodiac activity in the Snoozy and Furlong murders. And the final thing that I would like to share with you comes to us from 2 people named Thornton Daniel Jeffrey and Melissa Rose Tappa, who have been talking to me about their Zodiac suspect, Loringdale Hill, and they have a website out called ZodiacKillerBomb.com, and it was actually something that is taking the serial killer stories in a different direction. It was Melissa Rose who recommended a documentary series to me on Peacock called Violent Minds, which is about the work of Dr. Al Carlisle. Al Carlisle became very famous for his examinations of Ted Bundy, and he has a couple books out on the subject. Perhaps his most famous one is called Violent Mind, and it talks about how there were 650 hours of tapes that Al Carlisle had recorded that were not available to the public until only recently. And if you watch the Violent Minds documentary available on Peacock, there are a lot of discussions that they have just about serial killers in general. And when you listen to Al Carlisle talk, he seems to examine someone like Ted Bundy and points out that he just didn't worry about anything, that he was facing a very long prison sentence and possibly the death penalty, which ultimately Ted Bundy was executed, but he just didn't show any signs of nervousness, and he simply thought that he could talk his way out of it. Al Carlisle's words. And with the Zodiac killer, I think that there is something very similar because, as somebody just wrote out, one of you guys in the comments section was saying that psychopathic serial killers do not immediately use destruction to solve their problems. One aspect of psychopaths and sociopaths is they try to talk their way out of situations, and Ted Bundy perhaps was somewhat good at it, although not successful because he was convicted and ultimately murdered. And when I was watching Dr. Al Carlisle in this documentary, his face almost lit up when he was talking about how he was trying to learn more about Ted Bundy and sort through the false stories and the phony stories and the made-up BS and the actual facts and the truth. His face almost started glowing, and it's almost as if he was describing a game of mental chess. He didn't use that exact metaphor, but that's what it appeared that he was doing, just thinking that he viewed interacting with serial killers as a type of mental competition. Back in 2021, I became a fan of the show Clarice, which was available on CBS, and yes, it's talking about Clarice Starling, who was in the Thomas Harris novels, about Hannibal Lecter, and although the show Clarice on CBS had absolutely no mention of Hannibal Lecter, it took the story in a different direction and it focused on her. But she is a psychological profiler for the FBI, and she sees a therapist, a psychologist, and she said, okay, you're a psychological profiler, why don't you profile me as a therapist? And the first thing she said was, you like controlling people, you like dominating people. And that's just all I could think about when I was watching Al Carlisle in this documentary episode. And there are multiple ones. He doesn't only talk about Ted Bundy, that's just the first one I've watched. But it's just that he viewed the type of interactions with serial killers as an opportunity to dominate. But that's just my take on the subject, and I'm sure there are other elements to him, and I know there are other elements to his actions and activities, because even though he's just playing this game of mental chess, it's not only a game. Somebody like Al Carlisle is actually trying to get the truth. You're probably listening to the show because you have ideas about the true crime world and you want to hear what other people have to say. So I definitely think highly of Al Carlisle and I appreciate all the work that he did. And one more time, it's called Violent Minds, available on Peacock. Now, that's going to be all for me in this episode. Thank you so much to everybody who listened. My personal Facebook's in the description box. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Instagram, BlackBoxNid88, and I will see you over there. Goodbye.